So people should start to be filing back in shortly. So hopefully someone from your room got a chance to like choose who will be sharing back. If not, no problem. And just we can just popcorn it and any like thoughts people had. So I'll just open up this space for anyone. Any thoughts?
A common theme among our group to answer the question is just like the lack of funding in certain areas and just in local communities that have to deal with providing basic needs and also preventative resources so that people have access to care and have access to funding, but not funding, have access to these resources. But it's not just a funding issue, but it's also the lack of acknowledging that certain issues are actually problems. So it's mainly just more awareness that's needed, and I assume that more awareness brings more funding, because that's when the people who do the funding recognize that this is an issue and that we should channel more resources to that. But that's basically the gist of what we talked about.
All right, does anyone else have any thoughts? I'm not sure if there was another breakout room that had a discussion. All right, if not, we will just move on and continue talking about school-based health centers and the kind of things that they provide.
So I'm sure by now all of us are pretty familiar with school-based health centers, but just to go a little bit more into depth about how they benefit marginalized communities, they can provide accessible healthcare within the communities, and they reduce barriers such as transportation, cost, and concerns about confidentiality. Like transportation is definitely is one of the best parts about school-based health center, just because they're right inside of a school. Like me and Lane both are high school students that have school-based health centers, and it's just very easy to visit a school-based health center. And then they also provide welcoming and affirming care, and they reduce time off of work for parents and miss school for youth, which that also kind of goes along with the accessibility of school-based health centers. And then lastly, they improve educational outcomes because healthy kids learn better. So with school-based health centers, students, it has been like shown that schools with school-based health center have better educational outcomes because students are less sick and don't miss as much school because of illness and any other health barriers that may be in place.
So we talked a little bit about awareness and how funding is a huge issue, and the kinds of things that we want to see funded aren't necessarily being funded to the extent that they should be. So there is a huge role of policy and testimony in this when we talk about how we want school-based health centers to be funded, to what extent, and that kind of thing. So a lot of change happens through policymaking, as you all know. Bills are made, bills are passed, bills are not passed, and that influences the kind of funding that we get. And some of it is done through grants, and some of it is done through, kind of community welfare and mutual aid. But a lot of it also happens, from bills that are passed and from legislators, because they kind of hold the power. They hold the power of the purse. They can, make changes in how health centers are funded. And for example, in Oregon, I know there was a lot of work being done on a telehealth program, so that school-based health centers could fund telehealth to a greater level so that rural Oregonians could receive healthcare. And we hold the power to make change. It can be done through things like Advocacy Day, which we do in Oregon, I know, where students from across the state will go up to the Capitol and speak directly with legislators and talk to them about why health centers are important. They'll advocate for certain bills. If you can't participate in Advocacy Day in person, you can write letters to legislators, and they do read them. That is one of the biggest things that I think there's kind of a misconception about. I talked to a representative from Oregon, Earl Blumenauer, who's a great guy, and his office, they have like many staff that go through reading all the letters that people send, because there are thousands of bills every congressional session, and they can't get to them all. They can't read through them all, analyze them all, see if they're a good fit. So they rely on us, the people, the constituents, to advocate for them and let them know, hey, this bill is really important. You should take a look at it. It'll help my community, and I think that it's something that we should fund. And it's worked in Oregon, that's for sure. Our school-based health centers have continued receiving funding and received increased funding for years because of the advocacy that young people, old people, queer people do to get that funding happening. Because I love mutual aid and all of that type of thing, but the government has a lot of money and they need to know where to spend it and where it's going to be the most effective. And that's something that we can help with. Yeah. So in the chat, I would love if y'all could just write maybe one way that you have advocated for issues you're passionate about in the past. And this could be things like a social media campaign or volunteering to like get someone elected or anything like that, letter writing, all that kind of thing.
For me, at least, one big way that both of us have advocated for different issues in the past is through just spreading awareness. Like, as we mentioned at the very beginning of this, we have a podcast. And so just being able to have like an outlet where you can share your voice, just as a youth in our, like your community can be powerful as it is. Like, even if you don't feel comfortable like writing to a like government representative, just being able to effectively communicate and like share what you're passionate about with your peers or like teacher or like adults in your life. So that can just be very beneficial.
Yeah, and then Audrey put in the chat that she volunteers for her local health clinic to support reproductive justice, which is super great. Direct action and volunteering is one of the best ways that you can directly impact your community. And so like, while, for example, with food insecurity, some people might go testify at like congressional meetings and be like, hey, we need more money to fund SNAP and other food related programming so that people have access to food. Whereas other people might go volunteer at a food bank or, do something like that. So there's all these different ways to get involved with causes and, advocate for issues that you're passionate about, because not everyone is going to be like a raw like protest leader, and everyone below that is just as important because they lay the groundwork. So if any others come through in the chat, we will shout those out. But for now, I'll move on to talking kind of about the structure of testimony and tips for when you give testimony. So testimony can be online, it can be in person, it can be at like a town hall or at a local board meeting or something like that. But every time that I've testified, the time has been very limited. You usually get 3 minutes, maybe 2 minutes if they're running short on time. Once I even had 1 minute to give my testimony. So you don't want to ramble. You don't want to kind of just have a rough idea of what you want to talk about. You really want to know what you're there to say, and you want to be passionate about it because you have a short time to deliver this, testimony. You also want to know who you're talking to, because if you're going to be talking to a group of legislators, you're going to come at that with a very different testimony than if you're talking to like a community board member who might not have as much information about what you're talking about. So just thinking about not over explaining things if they already know what you're talking about, because you have limited time. In terms of the structure of it, you'll want to start with an intro, name, pronouns. And I think the thing that a lot of people forget is where you're from, because they're going to be a lot more receptive to what you're saying if you have a connection to them or the community you're talking about. So for instance, if I was talking about, if I was testifying on an education bill, I'd want to say, I'm a high school student here at McDaniel in Portland, Oregon, and this is what I'm talking about. Or, just sharing the community that you're from, because it can make a really personal connection. Once you're in the body of your testimony, you can personalize it more. A lot of people love using facts and data and numbers, and that's fantastic. It's effective. A lot of times legislators might not have all of those things, so it's important to deliver those. You can also work in a personal story, which I think is probably the most effective from what I've seen, because legislators, they have a lot of people giving them data, giving them information, and they need kind of to hear your personal story as a constituent, as someone in the community. And so sharing that can be really powerful, and it can, make change in a really great way. In the conclusion, you want to conclude with your key points, end strong. A lot of times people will kind of ramble off, and just because either they have to fill time or they feel like they're running up on time, so they will just kind of not finish on a strong point. And you always just want to hammer your key points home as you finish. And then as a young person, especially, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
You can finish. I have a question at the end of this.
Okay. As a young person, I think it's really important to bring people to support you as you testify, because I think the first time I testified was when I was 13, and I walked into a room of like 40 adults, and I was the youngest person in the room, and I didn't have experience. And so it was really scary to walk into that kind of environment without 3 or 4 people behind me supporting me. And it's also, if you have 3 people in a row talking about the same issue, it's a lot more likely that they're going to be like, okay, maybe we should look into this a little more, because it's going to be more impactful.
And one thing I'd like to add, along with having multiple people there to support you, one of my experiences happened on Advocacy Day, where we, 4 people from my school's Youth Action Council all went up, and we all split it up. So multiple people told their story about experience with school-based health center, which definitely, and then one person shared statistics, and one person did the intro and the closing, and just structuring it like that can be really beneficial, where the legislator is hearing from multiple youth on maybe not necessarily the exact same issues, but issues that can all be strung together. And yeah, so just having those people there to support you and figuring out how you want to break it up.
And feel free to go ahead now, Chris.
Yeah, you guys kind of just answered my question. I was going to ask, as a young person, have you ever been in environments where you're going up to give a testimony about something and to advocate, but you felt kind of nervous because of the fact that you were the youngest person in the room? And how do you kind of deal with that in your own head and make sure that it's not tripping you up because you're constantly thinking about it?
I think the most important thing is to just speak from your own experience, because even if, because it is scary walking into a room like that and knowing that these people have PhDs, they've been working in this field for 20 years, but they're not a young person. They don't have the knowledge that you do. A lot of them haven't been in schools for 20, 30, 40, 50 years even. They might have kids, but they don't see the world through your eyes. So your experience is just as valid, and possibly more valid than theirs, because you're living it. And so I think just, keeping that in your mind as you walk up, and knowing that a lot of times they're going to be impressed with you for, coming to this space. They're not necessarily going to discredit you because you're young. They're going to be like, this kid is, making, they're showing up to this meeting that is either during the school day or at 6:30 on some random weeknight, when it's really hard to make it out there, and they're making the effort to testify and put themselves out there. So in general, people are super welcoming and kind and supportive. So I think that's good to keep in mind.
Yeah, and one thing that I have to add to that is I just remember my very first Advocacy Day, which I highly recommend for any of you involved in school-based health centers, and just getting a group of other young adults together to go talk to a legislator about a specific issue, and maybe even gain support on a bill. But this goes back to last year, to Advocacy Day, when I was pretty like unfamiliar with school-based health centers. I'd been in my school's youth action council for probably a month and a half at this point. So I was very unfamiliar with it. And watching other people do it first can always be beneficial. Like I watched Lane actually give a testimony, which he at this point is since doing it for what, past 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Has gotten really good at it. So just watching him give a testimony to a legislator could just be very powerful for like myself or for another young adult, like another teenager, just like maybe, or just like right around your age, maybe even younger, give it, can just like seeing it done beforehand is just really beneficial. And if possible, sitting in on a like legislative meeting, I'd recommend before. And just the other thing, after like watching Lane do that 2 or 3 times, I felt comfortable doing it by myself and talking about the same bill. And yeah, then I was able to give it by myself.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for that question. Is there anything else from people? All
I have a
right.
question.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak to and share where to find these open places to testify and to share your story, because I think that could be useful for people as well.
Yeah, for sure. So it depends on what you want to testify on and when it's being testified on, because for example, I've done a lot of work with my regional transportation organization. And so it can be hard because you have to look through their website and figure out what committee is meeting and when they're meeting and what they're meeting about. So for example, there was this transportation measure about 2 years ago that was being worked on, and they had a whole committee that was working on it. And so you'd go into the website, you'd look for the committee, and they usually have a schedule of meetings right there. And it'll tell you if there's public comment is usually what it's called. And so if there's time for public comment, you just show up, write your name down, and you can get in line to testify. For like state budget meetings, those are usually like I've seen it posted on social media, like, hey, if there's a budget meeting at this time, you can sign up at like your state's congressional website if you go into the committee and the meeting. And so sometimes you'll sign up online and you'll have to wait through the whole meeting and see if you get to testify, because if a lot of people testify, sometimes you go to the whole meeting, sit through it, and you don't get to testify. That happened to me at 3 separate budget meetings all in a row, because you never know whether or not you're going to be able to testify. So it can be frustrating, but yeah.
Then for me, how I have primarily been able to testify is there's a website where you can look up like your senator and all of the representatives of your district and like where you live. And usually once you know their name, it's fairly easy to find contact information for them. And for at least here in Oregon, these representatives want to hear from teenagers. And so if you just send them an email or write them a little letter and ask to set up a Zoom call, most of the time they are pretty open to setting up a Zoom call and just finding out a time that works for you to meet with you, and you can just give your little testimony. And it normally only takes probably 5 to 15 minutes, depending on what you're talking about. And then just having that one-on-one space is definitely beneficial, because sometimes it's not the representative, but they're like assistant or one of their staff members. And they pass the information along, and just having that space open for them to ask questions to you too, about like your personal experiences or about like things you've seen within your community, can also be very beneficial.
And then just another note, if you're not able to show up to the meeting or you don't want to do it like on video, you can also submit written testimony, which is great for people who have like anxiety issues or just don't have time to sit through a whole meeting.
Mm-hmm. And that written testimony, also just having like, it can definitely be a little stressful to like just have like be like, I have to talk about all this in like a minute and a half, and being able to like write through your thoughts first and like form concrete thoughts can definitely be like beneficial as well with written testimony.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Is there any other questions, comments? All right, we'll move on to our fun little testimony activity then. So you all just learned what a testimony is, why it's important, how you build it, and some of the things you should include. So we're going to head back into breakout rooms for about 12 to 13 minutes. You're going to pick a topic either from this list, or if you have something that you're really passionate about, you can of course do that. So I just put in improved sexual education, funding for school-based health centers, gun control, reproductive healthcare access, and climate protections, like just some hot button issues or, important things. And so you'll want to do your little intro. You'll want to have like one personal story or data if you want to go and find that, and then just conclude. It should be like 1 to 2 minutes, real short, real easy. You can do it on like a notes app on your phone or something if you want. You can just bullet point it out. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then you'll just share it out with your group when you're done. So this isn't high pressure, like no worries. This is just something to, get your brain moving and thinking about, how you create a testimony, because sometimes you have like 15 minutes to make one right before a meeting. You're like, oh shoot, I gotta go. So yeah, are there any questions about this? And if you're driving or something, no worries. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. And then my biggest tip is for your first one, choosing things you are like that. If this is your first time giving a testimony, choose something that you are passionate about. Because when you're giving that testimony, passion really shows through. And if the representative can tell it's something you are truly passionate about, it doesn't really matter how well put together it is, or if you're stuttering, or your thoughts aren't coherent. They'll hear that passion inside of your voice. Okay, so with that being said, y'all can head into your breakout rooms. Okay. Everyone should be returning back shortly. And then with that, we will open that up for any questions, comments, and concerns. And then I also believe Harper has a
Final
evaluation.
Yeah, just a super quick poll for everyone, and then Sieta is going to close us out as well. So yeah, feel free to ask Lauren and Lane any questions. We might still be waiting for one of the rooms.
Yeah,
I think so. I hit close all rooms, so it should.
I'll be like 60 seconds.
Yeah, I think it's.
No worries. How did the testimonies go?
Oh my gosh, they were so good. I heard so many great testimonies. If I was a legislator, my vote would be with, care and gun rights. Gun restrictions. So yeah, lots of great testimony. I was super impressed. Oh my gosh.
Amazing. That's such good practice. So it's a good
Yes.
exercise. All right. Sweet. Then I'm gonna launch that quick evaluation poll, and then we can go ahead and just close. Sieta, if you wanna close us out here.
Oh, you're screen sharing. Okay. Yeah, so everyone, thank you all for coming.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Lauren and Lane. That was an amazing presentation. I had a lot of fun working through that testimony outline. It was a lot of fun. I've never done that before. So like they said, there is an evaluation poll. So if you could take that time to do it now, that'd be great. Our next session is tomorrow at 3:30. If you have not registered for this session, I encourage you to register using the link in the chat. And remember, every session is an additional entry to the Be the Change raffle with a prize of a whole year of Spotify Premium. So make sure to come for the next sessions. If you would like to stay in contact with us, here are a few ways. You can check out our Instagram and Twitter at SBHA YAC, or you can email the Youth Advisory Council at this email right here. Let's see. If you're interested in youth development, feel free to email us at youthdevelopment@sbhforall.org. You can also subscribe to the Youth Development Digest that is sent out every month, and check out the youthhealthhub.org, which is our new youth-focused website. So thank you all again for joining. This concludes our sessions for today, and we hope to see you tomorrow at 3:30 Eastern Time.
Thank y'all so